All right, review for test number 3. So chapter 8, keep in mind, and we talked about this just as an overarching concept, it's not really on your outline, how important contracts are for a stable economy and a stable market. We have to have some certainty in order to keep our economy and our market stable. So don't forget, requirements of a valid contract. One to focus on is the agreement. So put a star by agreement. Remember, you have to have an offer and an acceptance of that offer to have an agreement. That's the most vital step of a contract. Under defenses to the enforceability, don't forget about voluntary consent. Parties have to be voluntarily entering into these contracts. They can't be under any kind of duress or, under mistake, fraud, that kind of thing. It has to be voluntarily entering into and agreeing to the terms of the contract. All right, contract types, 1B there. Don't forget about a unilateral contract. That is one where you can only accept the person's offer by actually performing. Okay, you can only accept the offer that they'll give you $500 if you can find their dog, not by promising to find their dog, but finding their dog. Okay, it's an offer that can only be accepted by actually performing. A lottery ticket. They offer to pay you if this happens. Well, you can't just promise to get those numbers. You got to get those numbers. And then if you do, that's an agreement. They have to honor it. Okay, second page. Number 3, remember express versus implied. So express contracts are where we have all the terms outlined, no question. Here is every term written down on a piece of paper. We've discussed all of them. As opposed to an implied contract. You've mowed my yard every Friday for 4 years, and every Saturday I've put a check in the mail to you for your payment. We've never sat down and discussed the terms of our agreement, but by our conduct, we have an implied contract. And you can argue that we have a contract and you had an expectation to be paid so that when I don't pay you, you can haul me into court. Okay? All right. Looking more under agreement, need to make sure you really focus on the offer and the acceptance. So for offer, don't forget that when we talk about whether an offer was for real, remember it has to be serious and objective. That's under, let's see, A, little one, big one. Remember, we're looking at the reasonable person standard. So if my car's broken down on the side of the road and you walk by and I offer to sell it to you for $5, would the reasonable person have thought that I was getting rid of my car for $5? No. So the standard there about whether it was serious, whether the offer was serious, is going to be what a reasonable person would have thought. And then don't forget that it has to be communicated. The offer has to be communicated. So to have the agreement, we have to have offer and acceptance. So then don't forget about point B there, acceptance. That's you agreeing to the terms that have been given to you. Now, don't forget, too, we briefly touched on this. Don't forget that there's situations where you're going to have to differentiate an opinion of somebody versus an offer. Were they just giving you an opinion of how your car could be fixed? Or were they making an offer to fix it that you then accepted, and if they didn't do what they were supposed to do, you can sue them? Was it an opinion or was it an offer that could be accepted? Okay? On that last page, don't forget about the mailbox rule. When we talk about accepting somebody's offer, whenever it is sent or delivered, it is deemed accepted. Okay, so if they've made you an offer, you've sent the acceptance, you have an agreement, even if they haven't received it yet. You sent it. Therefore, your acceptance has been deemed accepted. Okay? And then don't forget about consideration. It's the value given in return for a promise. Now remember, it just has to be legally sufficient. That might be $5 for that car. That might be $1 for something. The courts don't care what the amount is. They don't care if you got a bad deal. They just want to make sure that it was legally sufficient, that there was something given up by one party in exchange for something from another party. That's what makes it a contract and not a gift where you just give somebody something. Bargain for exchange. Courts don't care about the adequacy of it. They just want to make sure that the consideration is there to make it a valid contract. Okay? Any questions on chapter 8? New? Okay. Chapter 10 is then all about breaching the contract. So don't forget about near the bottom of page 1 on chapter 10, breach of contract. So that's a party's failure to substantially perform the contract obligation. So remember, it's not necessarily a breach of contract if the other party didn't get line for line what they thought they were getting. Okay, it's not necessarily a breach. Did you substantially get what you thought you were getting from the other party? Now, sure, fraud can come in, misrepresentation. Taking all of that off the table, we're looking at, did both parties substantially perform how they were supposed to under the contract? Flipping to page 2, don't forget number 1 there, mutual rescission. Don't forget, people can agree to cancel a contract. I don't want to sell you my house anymore. Well, that's good because I couldn't get the money to buy it anyways. Great. Mutual rescission. We both agree to cancel our contract. Not everything has to end up in court. And don't forget, too, as an overall thing, most contracts are discharged, meaning they're over because people do what they're supposed to do. We're only talking about the instances where people don't. Okay, types of damages. Main one you need to know is compensatory. That's number 1 there. And remember, that's when we're talking about compensating you for your loss. And remember, if you thought you were getting something worth $100,000 and you think it's worth only $80,000, your compensatory damages are not $100,000. We're looking at the difference in what you got versus what you thought you were getting. So we're not compensating you for the whole thing. We're compensating you for the loss of the bargain. Okay, you bargained for this, you got this, what's the difference? And you need to know too about construction contracts. You don't have to know the different payouts, but just know, generally speaking, for construction contracts, the amount of damages is going to depend on who breaches and when they breach. So they've kind of got their special rules and formulas and whatnot. You don't have to know all of those. Just know that those are kind of a different animal when we're talking about compensatory damages. Don't forget too there, bottom of the page, mitigation of damages. You can't sit back after you've been harmed and let those damages just continue to accrue. If you have an employment contract, you think they breached it by firing you, well, guess what? You don't get to just sit around and remain, out of work simply because you're waiting for your case to be resolved 3 years later in court. No. You have a duty to mitigate those damages, meaning lessen them, lessen the blow. Go out, get other employment while you're still, filing suit and fighting in court against your previous employer. And then a couple on the last page that you need to know. Remember, sometimes money is not enough when we talk about a breach of contract. Sometimes you go to court and you don't want money, you want something else. The 2 you need to know, number 1 is rescission. So we talked about mutual rescission where both parties agree to cancel the contract. If you go to court asking for the court to rescind the contract, clearly the other side's not agreeing for you to. But what you're asking the court is, please court, cancel this contract and let us just both go to where we were before we ever signed this contract. So that's rescission. And then number 3, specific performance. I want what I bargained for. I got under contract on his house. I want that house. I don't want money. I don't want a different house. I want that house. So court, make him perform how he said he would under the contract and sell me his house. Okay? Any questions on chapter 10? All right, and then we just went through 13. I tried to tell you guys some stuff you needed to know. You need to know the common types of negotiable instruments. So a check, the promissory note, and the certificate of deposit. Okay, know the difference in those three different instruments. Okay, right there in the middle of your page. In the second page, second part, requirements for an instrument. We talked about the signature. Remember, signatures can be whatever your signature is. Number 3, remember it can reference another agreement. It just can't be conditioned on another agreement. And then number 4, remember it has to be a fixed amount of money, and it has to be money. Circle the word money. It has to be money that we're talking about. And then number 5, remember that it has to be a definite amount of time, either on demand or every month over the next 30 years. We have to know the time frame of that instrument. Okay, negotiating it, don't forget that and this is in the middle of page 2, don't forget that if it's an order instrument, if you want to give it to somebody, if you want to transfer it, you have to deliver it and do the endorsements. If it's a bearer instrument, you just have to deliver it. Nothing to endorse over. So remember those differences. Remember about a holder in due course. Generally know the definition of that. That is, somebody takes that instrument, they buy it in good faith without knowing that it's defective. They become a holder in due course, and they're not going to, be subject to a lot of the defenses that the original lender would have been. And then don't forget on the bottom, number 1, primary liability. If you draw out that check, you sign that promissory note, you're going to be the one that is primarily liable for the repayment of that money. All right, any questions at all? No? As you go to study, email me, whatever. I will help you gladly answer any of these questions. Don't forget that tests will open on Thursday at 8 a.m., close the following Tuesday on Election Day, 10 p.m., and same format, 15 true false, 35 multiple choice over those 3 chapters. And